In April of every year, a large number of new employees join the company. And what I always say to them is that we have many marvelous assets here, and the most valuable assets of all are the four letters SONY. I tell them, make sure the basis of your actions is increasing the value of these four letters, SONY. In other words, when you consider doing something, you must consider whether your action will increase the value of SONY or lower its value. That must be the basis of your action.
In September of 1945, Masaru Ibuka, a 37-year-old electrical engineer, left his measuring instruments business in northern Japan and moved to the ruins of post-war Tokyo to found the company that would become Sony.
We rented a small room in Shirokiya department store on the third floor. It had been a switchboard room, a cramped little room, and there was a switchboard right in the middle of it. That's where we settled in. We had to move the switchboard and we started the business.
We bought more than 100 of these tubs in Chiba and made them into rice cookers. The problem was, you never knew what quality of rice you were getting in those days. With good quality rice, if you were careful, it came out fine. But if the rice was just a little off, if it was too moist or too dry, we ended up with a batch that was soggy or falling apart. And no matter how many times we tried, it just wouldn't come out right. This is such a simple device. There's nothing to fix. I remember sitting there on the third floor in Shirokiya day after day and being fed rice that wasn't fit to eat. We simply could not make a product out of this, and finally we gave it up and were stuck with all these tubs.
Even before he had a saleable product, Ibuka saw clearly the kind of company he wanted to build. In a 12-page mission statement written in January 1946, he set down his strategy: the swift commercialization of superior technology into products of use in everyday life. Ibuka dreamed of accomplishing this in an expansive, joyful workplace where dedicated engineers would have the freedom to fully develop their potential.
Technology was to come first. We committed to serving a purpose in the world by making the best possible use of the technology and wonderful products. We resolved to create a kind of workplace where the engineers and all our employees could fully develop themselves. Thirdly, I mentioned this before, we didn't want to limit ourselves to government agencies and broadcasters. The business we imagined would create products that would be used and enjoyed by the broadest possible range of customers. Finally, and most important of all, we would make things that didn't exist anywhere else, things that no one else had done. No matter how complicated that might be, no matter how difficult technically, we resolved to meet all challenges to achieve our goal. These were the things that we committed to as we began the company we were calling Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo.
7 engineers accompanied Ibuka to Tokyo, where he was also joined by Akio Morita, a physicist by training. The men had become acquainted while working on a project for the Navy late in 1944. As the eldest of 3 brothers, Morita had been raised from childhood to take over his family's 300-year-old sake business.
My father was the 14th generation. Kyuzaemon the 14th was the traditional name he assumed when he took over the business. That meant that my elder brother was destined to become Kyuzaemon Morita, the 15th.
When I was in grade school, the phonograph was the kind you crank by hand. My mother liked Western music, and she had me listen to Caruso or old records from the time I was a child. I grew to like that kind of music too. From the time I was in grade school, I listened to records. About the time I went to middle school, the electric phonograph was finally imported to Japan from the United States. And my father said it was important for us children to hear good sounds and bought us one. When I played the records I knew on that electric phonograph, it was an entirely different sound, the same record. That's when I began to realize that electronics was really something. Somehow or other, I decided to try and build my own phonograph. I studied hard and even bought my own vacuum tubes.
From about that time, everything he did was about electronics. So I did begin to wonder if he really intended to take over the family sake business.
We began by taking in radios made overseas that couldn't be used anymore, and we'd adjust and repair them. This was reported in a column in the Asahi newspaper. Morita-san happened to see it in the paper in Nagoya, and he contacted us right away.
Naturally, since the eldest son in every generation took over the business, 15 generations over a period of 300 years. So naturally, my brother leaving was a major upset. But as I mentioned before, my father managed not to get furious about it. He even seemed resigned. He'd been watching my brother since he was a child.
Morita had been indelibly impressed by the elder Ibuka, and the feeling was mutual. Unwavering respect and fierce allegiance bound these men together all their lives.
The relationship between my father and Morita-san, in the manner of speaking, they are like family. Very intimate, so close that others could sometimes feel excluded. They said very little, but they understood and trusted each other implicitly.
Most men get along well enough for 3 or 5 years, but at some point there's a disagreement or an argument. But those two, for all those years, they were perfectly in tune. In their work lives, their personal lives, they were perfectly matched. I never saw anything like it.
There were many occasions when Ibuka-san's opinion and my brother's opinion and the opinion of others who were involved were entirely different. But both Ibuka-san and my brother insisted that listening to what his superior had to say and answering, yes, yes, of course, was meaningless. Everyone's opinions should be thrown together from various angles, and then when it was decided that this was the way to go, everyone should move into action together. But until the decision was made, whether you were a new employee or the president or whoever, you should express your own opinion freely. That's how they taught us to be, and I believe that perfectly reflected their own relationship.
Together, Ibuka and Morita planted the seeds which would grow into the Sony spirit. Their passion was innovation and getting to market first.
Ibuka-san's way was pleasing the customer by creating innovative products with new technology. That was the joy of technology. If you have an idea, try it, no matter whether it works or not. If it does work, develop it. Things may not go the way you hope they would at first, but trying is what counts.
The company's first target was a magnetic tape recorder and magnetic tape. Once Ibuka had set his sights on a technical challenge, nothing could stop him until he had the product in his hands. In 1952, Ibuka decided that transistors would play a critical role in Sony's future and resolved to develop a transistor radio in spite of the difficulty.
In those days, taking money out of the country was strictly controlled, and everything you did required a permit. When we went to the Trade Ministry on our hands and knees, saying we wanted to try transistors, they said we were dreaming. A tiny company that hadn't even made vacuum tubes? What made us think we could handle transistors? An allocation of dollars was out of the question, they said, and laughed us out of the room.
Unfazed, Ibuka dispatched Morita to the United States to secure a technical license for transistors from Western Electric.
During my second meeting with Mr. Akio Morita, I had some misgivings about his signing the license agreement without obtaining the Japanese government's approval. But nevertheless, he seemed so persuasive and anxious to proceed with his plans, and after all, it took considerable time and expense for him to repeatedly come to the United States from Japan, that I decided, even with these misgivings, to give him all some of the essential technical information.
In 1954, the ministry finally gave us a permit. And I went flying off to America with the late Kazuo Iwama to Western Electric, and that's where we saw transistors being manufactured for the first time. It was some complicated business, and I asked Iwama, "Hey, are we over our heads here?" And of course, he'd been studying for a year and was full of confidence. He asked question after question and loaded them up with technical terms. I couldn't believe my ears. And the Western Electric people were amazed too. They wanted to know if we already manufactured transistors.
Working late into the night in his hotel room, Kazuo Iwama filed detailed memos to Tokyo on the manufacturing process. Returning to Japan, he led the technical group which labored to develop the high-frequency transistor that was the key to Sony's first transistor radio, the TR-55.
The people at Western told us that transistors could only be used for hearing aids. They said it would be extremely difficult to get the high frequency a radio would require. But we worked in a frenzy until we had achieved an RF-level transistor. And that led to what we call the pocketable radio. Vacuum tube portable radios were already on the market, but they didn't take off and sell. And Ibuka-san said, with this kind of pocketable radio, which is small and which is light, people all across Japan will buy. From the very beginning, he said, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to sell one set to every individual in the country.
Ibuka was worshipped by his engineers, who outdid themselves for him year after year.
Ibuka-san truly understood the mentality of an engineer. He never instructed me to do anything. Instead of ordering, he discussed things with you. Maybe if we tried this, we could achieve what I want. He'd tell you what he hoped for. To all of us, to me, that was a very special gift. If you receive an order, you have to do exactly what you've been told. But I'm like Ibuka-san. I don't imitate others. If someone tells me what to do, I'm stubborn.
We had a metal cylinder inside a video mechanism, and since the cylinder was a tape transport, its surface had to be very smooth. And we were researching how to make the surface of metal smooth. One day, Ibuka-san came over and I was guiding him around, and I said to him, "Ibuka-san, this is the smoothest metal surface in the world." And he took one of the samples lying there and licked it. He had to test it with his own tongue. His eyes were bright like a child's and full of fun. He wanted to have fun, to try it for himself. In a word, that's the sort of man he was.